Welcome to ASCI Webinar on how can analytics help retailers proactively manage their supply chains. I see that we have more attendees joining, so I will wait for about a minute before we officially start. Welcome everyone, and I want to do a test. If you can hear me, can you raise your hand? You will see there is a raise hand button at the bottom. Okay, I see that. Perfect. Thank you very much. I hope you all are having a great day. My name is Heidi Chow. Because we're waiting for all the attendees joining, so I just want to introduce myself. Some of you recognize my name through emails contacts. I'm the head of business operations for ASCI. And before we start the webinar, I just want to go through some logistics with you all. So I see that more and more people joining, so I will wait for a few seconds before I go over the logistics. Please bear with me. Okay, I see that kind of pause now. So I want to go through some logistics with you all. So during the webinar, you are welcome to ask questions. At the bottom of the Zoom window, you will see there is a Q&A box. So you can click that and then type your questions. At the end of the presentation, we have a section for Q&A. Our speaker, Aitor, will answer your questions. And also, you see there is a chat box as well. That's also for you if you have any issues. For example, if you cannot hear us all of a sudden, just let us know. I will keep monitoring that to make sure we have a smooth webinar. And also, I want to remind you that the webinar is recorded. After today's webinar, we will upload that to our YouTube channel, and all of you will receive a link to that YouTube video, probably tomorrow. After our editing, we will upload on YouTube, and I will send you a link so you can get a copy and share with your colleagues. So now I think we have most of the attendees joined, and I will introduce our speaker. And you can see Aitor Marroquin is our speaker for the day. Aitor is the Key Account Director at EV Cargo Technology. He's based in Sydney, and he's responsible for driving customer experience across key accounts and for business growth in Australia and New Zealand. Aitor.
Thank you, Heidi. I'm very happy to be here today. I know it's lunchtime, so appreciate you making some time to join this webinar, and hopefully you can enjoy it while you're eating your lunch. Or yes, Heidi said it's going to be recorded as well, so that will be available later on. So let's go through the agenda first. So today we're going to cover five items. We're going to go through a very quick introduction of myself. Obviously, Heidi's already gone through who I am at a high level, and I will also be covering very quickly who is EV Cargo Technology, so the company that I work for. We'll be jumping into the topic overview, so understanding what are we going to be talking about today during the webinar. Moving into supply chain challenges within retail, so we're going to touch on what are some of the main headaches in the industry at the moment, which obviously most people probably know and guess, but we're going to be going through that in a bit more detail. And then we'll jump into how can analytics help, which is obviously the topic for today. I'll be wrapping it up with a key takeaways slide. And as Heidi said, there's going to be a bit of a Q&A at the end, hopefully if we got time. So feel free to write any questions in the chat box. Okay, so a bit about myself. That's me. That picture is around a year ago when I arrived into Australia, actually. So from the UK. So having spent the last eight years working in the UK. So as Heidi mentioned, I'm a key account director based in Sydney. Obviously, usually quite sunny, but as many of you will know, it's been raining quite a bit lately. But anyway, my experience is supply chain, basically over the last 12 years. Across different roles. So from a supply chain technology point of view, such as my current role, working for EV Cargo Tech, freight forwarding, working across a couple of freight forwarders. One of them was linked to EV Cargo in the UK, and also working for a shipping line from a trade and commercial perspective. That's how I started my career around 12 years ago. Also, my background is retail focused. So I've been working with retailers since pretty much the beginning of my career. Very work very closely with retailers such as ASOS, Next, Urban Outfitters, the Warehouse Group here in New Zealand, Broadbank in Australia, and so on. So yeah, have a bit of experience on that end, and also international, as you can probably guess by my thick accent. I'm originally from Spain, and yeah, I have lived and worked in a few countries such as well, the UK, the US, France, and now Australia for the last year. So who is EV Cargo Technology? Very quickly. We are part of EV Cargo, which is $1.5 billion US logistics and technology group. We have been developing software for over 20 years on the sourcing, compliance, and logistics space. We have a global client base. I will show you some of those clients in the next slide for your reference. And we're trusted by over 70 retailers, which I will also cover some of them in the next slide. And they use our modules in different shapes and forms throughout the business. In terms of numbers, we have around 6,000 suppliers that are connected to EV Cargo Technology portals worldwide, and around 1.5 million orders go through our systems every year. So just to put everything into context. These are some of our clients. I won't go through them in detail, but just to give you a bit of an overview. So at the top, we got Australian and New Zealand brands, which you may recognize. In the middle, we got some Asian and South African brands, and at the bottom, UK and European brands. So again, predominantly retail focused from a technology point of view. Okay, so if we jump into today's topic, before we jump into analytics, one of the main questions to answer is, well, information, right? So information is everywhere, and the question is, how do we make the most of it? So we live in a digital age in our personal lives where we have information at the palm of our hands. Location information is available 24/7 from delivery, takeaway. We know what the driver is at every minute. We know the weather forecast. We know the news. We have so much information. We are very lucky as a generation to have such a wealth of data. To put it into numbers, in 2020, the total amount of data created, captured, and copied was around 44 trillion gigabytes globally. So this is obviously a number very difficult to put into context, but just to I guess explain the size of data that's around us every day. Obviously, this is in generic terms in our personal lives, but when it comes to supply chain, this is also true in the way that we have a lot of information and data around us, and a lot of issues and inputs of operational problems that we need to process. So if we look at things from a retailer's point of view, on one hand, we got operational factors affecting our supply chain. So, for example, COVID-19, everybody knows about it in a lot of detail. There's no need to explain all of the challenges that COVID-19 has created. If anything, this has raised supply chain to the global mainstream media, and everybody's aware about the implications and whether it's going to affect Christmas and so on. So supply chain is more important than ever. But in terms of the challenges, whether it's supply, shortage of product, shipping prices, or shops being closed, this is affecting retailers every day, really. We also got supplier and carrier delays. This is not new at all. This has been around even a long time before COVID-19, whether there is a carrier shipping line being delayed, or whether we have a specific supplier that's late to hand over some cargo. That's something that retailers have to deal with on a constant basis as well. Port disruptions as well, nothing new, whether it's a crane being down in India, or fog affecting operations in China, or port strikes in Australia. Port disruptions also have a major impact on our supply chain. But not all factors actually that retailers face are external. Some factors are internal as well. For example, changing intake targets. So whether there is a specific type of weather, for example, we know this summer now with La Nina coming, it's going to be a particularly cold summer, perhaps. So retailers will be changing their shift as to what kind of product they need. And even though we were expecting potentially to be selling dresses, we may be having to sell something a bit thicker, for example, because of the weather. So in changing on intake targets, that's something that happens all the time, and obviously weather is just an example. And the other item is evolving priorities. So whether it is a new warehouse being opening, a new store, or a key campaign, or a new brand, there's always going to be some shipments, some orders, and some level of priorities that will be moving around as a retailer. So that's on one hand operational factors, but obviously we also have access to a lot of data. So that data, whether depending on each retailer, whether it's a spreadsheet, a simple system, a very complicated system, retailers do have access to different levels of data available through different ways to them. First example is shipping events. So, for example, the life of a PO, the life of a shipment, all the different milestones happening throughout their life, whether the supplier books the order at origin, whether the vessel departs, the vessel arrives, and so on. That kind of information is usually available to retailers in this day and age, again, in different shapes and forms, but it's out there. We also got information around changes on ETAs or changes on delays. So we get multiple iterations of this type of information, whether a vessel is delayed today by a day, then tomorrow is going to be delayed a bit farther, then the next day is going to be delayed, well, it's going to be maybe potentially put forward a few days. So we have all this level of information coming our way on a daily basis, where the goalpost really keeps moving from a delay point of view. We also have a lot of historical data, whether it's saved in some folder and some spreadsheet on some suppliers or provider system. Retailers usually have years of worth of data of how shipments move and how PO information was affected throughout not only this year but many previous years, and that's stored somewhere. And we also have a very granular level of detail. This is a PO SKU level most of the time. So we not only know a specific container was delayed, we know specific T-shirt, red T-shirt, medium-sized T-shirt was delayed from India last year, and we know how many times this type of PO and SKU level data information is delayed. So that information at that level of detail is already available to retailers as well. And lastly, performance. So we know whether a supplier is late, whether a carrier has met the expectations of their SLAs or their KPIs. So that information is usually available again to retailers. So the question is, as a retailer, so what do we do with all this information, right? So on one hand, we got all these operational factors, all of these challenges to solve. There are plenty of them to go after. And on the other hand, you will argue, well, we have a lot of data. So data is there, and we should be able to solve all of these challenges. So how do we do it? So that's obviously what we're going to be discussing today in a bit more detail in the next slides. And also, we are going to be diving into a bit of a demo later on into the presentation as well. So what challenges do retailers face? So there's a lot of them, obviously, but we will be focusing on 4 just today. So the first one is information overload in the digital age. And this is basically the constraint that our brains have as humans, that there's so much information our brains can process. Some of you may recall a famous study from the 50s, psychological study claiming that our brains can hold up to 7 pieces of information before we start forgetting things. This has been debated, and the number may be slightly different, but in any case, the point is that there is so much information that we can process our brains, and this impacts the level of processing that we can do with all those data inputs that we saw on the previous slide. Also, there's a lack of time in this fast-paced and ever-changing environment. So we don't have enough hours on the days. Our mailboxes tend to be full. We have so many meetings, Zoom calls, obviously in this day, and we just basically don't even if we have that processing capacity in our brains to go through all that data, we just don't have time usually to just try to tackle some of those challenges, and we find ourselves having to prioritize. Also, retailers at different levels, but there's a common problem, which is a lack of holistic end-to-end supply chain visibility. And by holistic and end-to-end, I mean having a true eagle-eye view of a supply chain. So traditionally, some retailers will silo some of their different parts of the supply chain. So you got the buyers and the merchandisers potentially looking at the upstream. You got inbound supply chain looking at the port-to-port, inbound or intake looking at the last mile delivery. So there's different departments sometimes looking at different parts of the supply chain. Obviously, there's a reason for that. But one of the effects of that is that sometimes there is a no end-to-end visibility, and we are not able to see what is the knock-on effect of some POs of some shipments potentially getting delayed at the very origin and having an impact later on port to port or a destination. So that holistic visibility is sometimes not there. And as a result, potentially, or not always as a result, but retailers tend to find themselves solving with problems in a reactive way. Sometimes we call it firefighting in the way that every day we kind of dealing with issues. Sometimes the issues that we deal with are probably at the last stage where they are pretty serious, where they've been escalated, where they are at the critical point, and obviously that's why some of us will need to focus on those. However, this means that we are not able to take a proactive approach on problem solving, and we find ourselves fighting in a reactive way with some of these issues. So what is the answer to some of these problems? So the answer is data, as you can probably guess, but the question is, how do we use it, right? So analytics as a topic has been around for a while, so it's nothing new. Visual representations of data, that's not groundbreaking. However, there is a difference between the different levels of visibility out there. And for example, if we look at business intelligence and analytics, we can see what some of these differences are. So first of all, data reporting. So business intelligence or many systems will provide retailers with this level of visibility from a report point of view, which is great. However, someone needs to go to the report, someone needs to understand what those hundreds of thousands of lines mean. So this is where analytics should come in, the role of true analytics, which is to make use of this information and show the retailer and show us so what is the relevant information within this 100,000 line report. You know, what do I need to look at? You know, what is this report telling me? Another area is information summary. So again, business intelligence will give you traditionally a visual representation of your top 10 ports, potentially your top 10 carriers, your top 10 suppliers, which again is a good start point. However, the role of analytics and the true power of analytics should be on prompting for action. So answering, so what? So do I have 10? These are my top 10 suppliers. These are my top 10 origins. So what do I do with this? Is this good? Is this bad? Do I need to action anything? Do I need to be happy with the results? And this is the level of insight that we will be looking from analytics to give us. And lastly, performance. So we know, again, whether a shipping line is late, whether a shipping line is early. We know whether a specific carrier supplier has met their KPI. But what we don't know sometimes is the context. So we don't know when we try to put things into perspective. So how often and how late is this carrier? How late is this carrier compared to all the other carriers that we work with? Are they always late? Are they always late by the same level of percentage? Sometimes, especially in this day and age with COVID, delays are the norm. So understanding what does this actually mean? So supplier being late and by how often and how much, this is again one of the areas that analytics should be able to provide from a strategic focus point of view. So how can analytics help? So first of all, going back to one of the problems that we discussed before is providing a holistic visibility. So this is connecting the dots from the beginning to end, and this means being able to see the knock-on effect of what some delays at the very origin will cause on your supply chain, which means that if a supplier hasn't raised an order in time, or a supplier hasn't handed over the cargo on time, this is not only going to miss the vessel, but it's going to miss your intake targets, and this is going to miss your launch of your new product. So not only focusing at the point where potentially it's a bit too late to solve, but trying to have that really end-to-end visibility to understand, how everything interconnects, and if something goes wrong at the origin, or at any stage of the supply chain, there is options to look at and put it all into perspective and context. Next one is interpreting the data. So finding meaning within vast amounts of data, and this is giving you the insight into the information that we have, and to find those efficiencies, we need to understand where we need to look. So we need information that is relevant to our business, and information that is actually meaningful. So providing those insights that are specific to your business and specific to the problems that you're facing, that's something that analytics will be able to help us with. Also focusing on what's important. Going back to the challenge that I described before, there's not enough time on the day. So even if we have all the insights and all the data in the world, realistically, there's so many problems we can solve. So what are the most effective problems? So within the hours that I have available in my day, how can I make sure that I minimize the impact to my supply chain? So focusing on those suppliers that, maybe one supplier is late 60% of the time, but that supplier is tiny and doesn't really give you, doesn't really impact your supply chain that much. Whereas if you look at chunkier suppliers, volume-wise, you may be able to have even though the percentage of lateness may be smaller, you may be able to have a bigger impact of influence on your supply chain. So being able to narrow down into the most effective ways to influence your supply chain, that's very important. And lastly, predictions, and this is where it gets exciting for analytics. So looking at all of your old data, trying to understand patterns, and trying to use that for future use. So looking at the performance in the past, looking at ETAs, looking at where products ship from and when, and under which weather, under which month, under which carrier, and utilizing all of that data to be able to make smarter decisions in the future. That's where one of the true powers of analytics lie. So what are some of the common questions and pain points that retailers have? And this is, I'm going to show you these questions, and I'm going to switch over to my browser to go through some of the solutions from EV Cargo Technology we've been working on from an analytics perspective, and just to exemplify and show you how some of these issues can potentially be solved through the use of analytics. So the first question is, how can I, as a retailer, pinpoint the bottlenecks in my supply chain? Second question is, how can I measure and drive performance against KPIs by learning from historic trends? Third question is, how can I ensure that I have the correct capacity to manage my inbound stock? And the fourth question is, how can I get a centralized view of my global volume? So those are 4 questions, example questions. Obviously, there's many other issues and questions that retailers are trying to solve in this day and age, but these are just some 4 examples that I'm gonna be spending some time to show you through our solution. So let me switch over to my browser. Just give me 1 second, please. And if you don't mind, I'm just gonna refresh all of the views, because there's a chance that while I was speaking, some of them maybe may have not gotten refreshed. So just 1 second. So I'm assuming everybody can see my browser. If not, please let me know, Heidi or Fiona, but I'll just wait until this loads. Okay, so the first scenario I'm going to be talking to you through today is, let me just do this. Yeah, okay. So the first scenario is, what are the bottlenecks right now in my supply chain, and how do I look at them from an eagle-eye point of view, right? So in this case, we're looking at a specific solution. I won't go through everything in detail, but just to give you an overview of some of the areas that we can answer and tackle these questions. So in this case, we can look at something that we call in play, which is every order, every shipment live within your supply chain. So this is not shipments that have been delivered already. These are shipments that are moving at this very moment. So these are shipments that are at the moment moving at different stages of the supply chain, and this view should be able to give you visibility of how do you action, how do you solve issues while you still have a chance to solve them. So not by the time that they're too late, but while there's a chance to go through them in a bit more detail. So in this case, we can see different stages of our supply chain. So we can see all of the orders of this specific fictitious retailer that are at the order stage. So they haven't shipped origin yet. So they are with the supplier or being booked or at the origin warehouse. They're at the origin. We can see everything that's been shipped, whether it's on the water, on the air, or on a truck, if you do China to Europe, for example, and everything that has been arrived. So if we look at order first, without jumping into the actual program first, we can see this specific retailer has around 13,000 units, so specific products that they have potentially an issue with. It's obviously a large retailer that we're looking at in this case. But in any way, there can be a lot of units within one specific container, so it may not be that many put into perspective. And something that we want to look at from a retailer's point of view is, okay, so we have delays. So overall, all of my orders, are they delayed on average? And some of these graphs, for example, down here, we can see the spread of days delay. So overall, all of my orders as a retailer, they are delayed by 1 day. So that's in principle good news in the way that nothing is very delayed. So most of the stuff is moving more or less 1 or 2 days within SLA, within KPI. Okay, and let's look at what's delayed then. So out of those 13,000 orders, how much are they delayed by? That's also very important. So are they delayed by a few days, or are they delayed by multiple weeks? So in this case, we can see they are delayed by 5 days. Depending on specific retailers, this may be good, this may be bad. That's something each retailer will need to assess and focus based on the KPIs. But we can see, put things into perspective again. So 5 days, potentially not too bad. And what is the longest? So what is the most critical issue that we need to look at? And we can see that on average, the longest delay that we got at the moment is 9 days. So that helps us before looking into the actual data. Again, having a quick look and a quick feel as to how good or how bad the state of my supply chain is at the moment. So if we jump into the actual view, this is showing us all of my orders again as a retailer that are at that stage of your supply chain. So before they have shipped, and we can see, okay, so we got 30% of my orders are tracking late, and we know from the previous view that on average they're around 5 days late. Sorry. And this is where we need to see, okay, so how can I action it? How can I make the most out of the data that we have? So if this was in an Excel file, or a system, it would be very difficult to look at. And this is where we can see different views. So we can look at things from a supplier perspective. So which suppliers are late in comparison to the volume, which is very important. Which origins are late? Is there any specific origin that we are aware from a supply chain perspective that there are manufacturing delays or there are problems at origin? We can look at that, and we can look at destination. You may argue destination may not be a factor for delays at an origin stage, but potentially depending on where you're going, some of your orders may have a delay. And we can see how late some of the orders, individual orders, are by in comparison with their PO quantity. So we can see how we can influence some of those orders. So in this case, if we look at specific suppliers, we can see, okay, well, supplier 37 has the most volume, has around 429 orders late. Is it worth focusing on this supplier first, or shall we tackle one that has potentially bigger delays? So if we click on supplier 50, for example, on average, this supplier is 3 days delayed, which is not too bad, I guess, but 70% of the orders are late. So this is potentially an issue, right? So this is the chance for us to, as merchandisers within a retailer, or buyers to to pick up the phone or send an email to a supplier and say what's going on here. We need to solve these delays because this is going to have a knock-on effect later on in the supply chain. And we can have a level of visibility at a line level, so we can see how late some of the orders are. So in this case, we can see 9 days, and we can also look at which ones are having the biggest impact based on the volume. So in this case, 9 days delay for this specific product, and how many units in this case, 185. So this is obviously one supplier coming from Rabat, Morocco. So only one origin from that supplier, but we can also look at whether there is any trends from a specific supplier point of view at an origin level. So if we click on all the data that is late, all of my orders that are late, we can see, we can look at origins, for example. So we can see the big majority of our volume that is late is actually in 3 origins: Istanbul, Rabat, and Shanghai. So again, do we know whether there's any specific issues with these origins, in which case it may justify some of the delays? If not, this is a warning for us to action and see, okay, we need to look at this very urgently because there is a potential issue here. So that is one part of the supply chain, and I won't go through every single part, but just to show you an overview. This is a apologies, wrong view. This was the last mile. So I'm going to show you the port-to-port view as well. So in this case, these are all of my shipments as a retailer, again, that are either in the water or on the air or on the road, so at the movement stage of my supply chain. And again, we need to understand, okay, so what can I do to influence, to remove delays, right? So how can I interpret this data? So in this case, around 20% of my orders or shipments in this case are late. Obviously, in this environment with COVID, these delays are the norm, but we need to identify, okay, do we have any carriers in this case, any shipping lines that are the latest by the most, and do we need to do anything with those specific lines? In this case, most of the lines are conveniently late by a similar percentage, so it doesn't look like there is a specific carrier. This is already an insight if this data was real, in the way that you can see that most carriers are actually late by a similar percentage, which means that well, you may accept or not accept that that's potentially a industry norm at the moment, but being able to benchmark against different carriers will be able to give you that level of visibility and intelligence that you can use to influence decisions. If we look at origins as well, we can see Istanbul, Shanghai, again, these are shipments that have left already. Origin, and potentially they are stuck because of issues. So for example, we may argue that we are aware of issues coming from Istanbul or Shanghai, but we're not aware of any problems from Colombo. Like, nobody's told us that there's any issues from Colombo in Sri Lanka as an origin. So this is a chance for us to dwell into the data. Everything within analytics, obviously, you should be able to download, and you should be able to look at the different data and to be able to pull that shipment level. But in this case, in Colombo, we can see, well, okay, so carrier-wise, they are all kind of looking at a similar level of delay. But we can look at containers as well. So in our industry, obviously, any container roll is not good. 7 days is not good, but obviously anything above 7 days is definitely an alarm and something that needs to be cannot be delayed any farther. So you have the visibility in this view, for example, from a container perspective, to understand how late these containers are, and whether we need to look into the data of any of these containers specifically, and being able to pick up the phone with the carrier and try to remove and minimize the risks as much as possible. So this is one view. So that was one question. So that was the question of, again, examples of what are the bottlenecks right now in my supply chain. The next question is, how can I measure and drive performance against KPIs by learning from historic trends? So whereas the other data was live data. In this case, we are looking at data that is historic. So whether there are 3 months worth of data, or whether they are a year worth of data. In this case, we're looking at 3 months specifically. And again, we can look at different parts of our supply chain. So we can look at the shipping part, we can look at the arrival part, so port to port and delivery. So when we look at historic data, the important thing is to try to put things into perspective. So similarly to when we were looking at live data within my supply chain, when we look at historic data, we need to understand, okay, how late and how often was a specific supplier, what was the really important meaning behind the data that we're looking at. So in this case, we're looking at 59,000 products that were shipped over a specific period of 3 months in the past. We can see 4% of them were late, 4.8%, and then this is when we need to start understanding, okay, so how do we put this into context, and how do we understand whether these suppliers were actually late or as a norm, or whether it was a one-off, or whether they have to, whether it's something that we need to do as a retailer to influence that level of delay. So we can look at the suppliers, we can look at the shipping over time, we can look at the PO orders, but something that is very useful in this case is looking at how late and how often specific suppliers are. So in this case, we can see this is a small little supplier, supplier 22, was on average, percentage-wise, the latest, so 12% of the orders were delayed. Again, going back to the topic of prioritizing time, if we have all the time in the world, we obviously tackle every single supplier. If we need to focus on biggest impact, we may want to choose a supplier that potentially has slightly larger volume, but potentially, even though it has a less percentage of orders that are being late, by having a large volume, this will have an impact, bigger impact on our supply chain. So when we look at this specific example, so supplier 36, their orders were only late 9.7% of the time, but it's important to understand some trends, such as, okay, how often were they late? So in this case, if we look at different data, we can see week 36 and week 37, that's the only weeks really that they were late, the suppliers. So again, depending on different retailers, you may choose to say, well, okay, that's not too bad. Then they had a bit of a hiccup during 2 weeks, but overall, there doesn't seem to be a continuous doesn't seem to be a problem every week. And this is again why it's important to look at data and put it into perspective, because if you look at a supplier that is 10% of the time late, which may or may not be a good enough KPI or SLA number, in this case, you can put things into perspective and understand, well, actually, they were only late for a couple of weeks, in which case you may be able to look into different suppliers, for example. And you can look at the orders, right? You can look at and understand how late the orders were, and understand whether there is any orders that were very, very late or very, very early, and again, put that into perspective. Also, trying to answer the same question. So how can we measure drive performance against KPI? If we look at a similar view, but also looking at historic data. So this is what we see in the port-to-port performance of my supply chain over the same period of time. So 3 months in this case. So we got, again, multiple carriers which were late conveniently at a similar percentage, which, as we said before, that's on itself an insight and an important level of data that we need to look at. And again, how late and how often we need to look at specific carriers. So if we pick, for example, carrier 14, which seems to be the carrier with the largest percentage of orders being late, we can look at the trends and we can see and understand whether this is an actual issue or not. So in this case, picking out a specific example, carrier 12, they were late pretty much every week, apart from week 36 and week 40, which tells us that it wasn't a one-off issue. They seem to be late regularly every week. So that's some information that we can use when we try to have reviews with the carriers and try to understand was the performance good or not. We can also look at different containers, how late they were by. So in this case, 14 days, 13 days, 10 days. So all the different levels of delays, I guess, are available in the data, and that's something that we can have in handy when we are reviewing historic data. So if I move on to the next slide. So it's not a slide, but this is the next scenario, which is how can I ensure that I have the correct capacity to manage my inbound stock. So in this case, I'm a retailer, and I'm looking at my next 4 weeks. So we are seeing like a 1.9 million units coming in into my warehouses, and this is a 77% increase compared to the last 4 weeks. So there are some big weeks coming up. Maybe a specific event like Black Friday or Christmas or anything else. So we may be aware of it, or we may not be aware, in which case we need to plan. So this insight is about how do we ensure that we have the right level of capacity, and how do we deal with any potential problems that we have with the volume that's coming in over the next few weeks. So in this case, we're looking at an example. We are a UK retailer in this case. We can see one question is, okay, what is the value of the cargo coming in over the next few weeks? Because sometimes it's very important to look at we may have targets, intake targets by value by week, as to how much money we need to process through the warehouse when it comes to different products. So that's a view that we have available right here. We can change the currency to show US dollars, Australian dollars, or whatever it is. It's also very important for us to understand the breakdown of mode, whether we have air freight coming in or road freight. Some retailers may prioritize air freight into the warehouses. So this view is quite useful. And then when we look at the DC forecast by warehouse as well, we need to understand, okay, so as of what I got right now coming in, do I have enough capacity into what's coming into the warehouse? So this is where we start applying some of the smart logics and smart insights to understand what's coming in based on what's being booked, but also based on what's being forecasted. So analytics will have the power to make assumptions based on historic trends and based on potential milestones that haven't been achieved yet. So whether a shipment hasn't been DC booked yet, we should be able to have the power and the ability to project what kind of level of bookings we can expect based on historic data and based on what's on the water at the moment. So in this case, we can see warehouse 3 based on the forecast or forecasted data, not just the latest milestone. We can see it's about to run out of space. Yesterday was actually showing going above capacity, so 3% above capacity, in which case we need to look at, as a retailer, ways to prioritize our data and ways to prioritize our incoming volume as well. So this is one insight. And the other insight, before I move on to the next view, is ETAs. So retailers will ask themselves, so is the volume actually going to come in, right? So, okay, this is the forecast, but what do we know from previous data? So in this case, we can look at predictive ETAs, which analytics should look at not just the ETA that the carrier is giving us, but also trying to focus on what have we learned based on previous experiences. So based on previous port-to-port performance, what do we expect is going to be the performance of the carrier? So in this case, we can see the different destination ports in the UK, different volume, and we can have a quick comparison between what is expected by the carrier ETA versus the prediction. So in this case, for example, for next week, assuming we are looking at next week fictitiously, we have some orders that were supposed to come on the 7th, but actually the predicted ETA is telling us that they're going to come later. So we should plan for them actually to come the following week and reserve our space this week for other cargo, because based on historic data, it's likely that those shipments will not be coming. Okay, and then just the last view before I wrap up. So this is the last question, which is how can I get a centralized view of my supply chain? So sometimes we need to visualize our supply chain end to end. In this case, we can see a breakdown of our supply chain by mode. We can see the trend year-on-year consolidation, which we will touch on very quickly, and also the breakdown of volume by origin country in this case. And we can see the world, suppliers and destinations, and we can get to understand, okay, so how do I, where does all my supply chain volume come from? Which origins are the largest? So we can see a little bit of a heat map here, where we can see the darker the color is the largest the volume. So India, Turkey, and Morocco will be countries that are the biggest volume within my supply chain. And we can start drilling into the data into detail to understand how is my supply chain interconnected between countries. So in this view, for example, we can see how every country connects with each other. So we can see how Australia, India, China, the UK, and so on are interconnected and linked, which is something that we need to use to understand our sourcing trends and patterns globally. And sometimes, obviously, in this case, we're looking at the whole map. So we may only want to look at Australia. Obviously, that's where we are based here. And if we are part of a global retailer that needs to focus on one specific country, then we can narrow down the information to look at a specific country like Australia, and we can see that China, India, Turkey, Portugal, and Morocco, those are the origins that most of my data is coming from. So this is one example of how we can make the most out of the data and put it into context to try to understand some of the patterns from a sourcing perspective. The other element is looking at consolidation as well. So is there any consolidation within our supply chains? Is there any area that we can look at? So if we look at the different units of measurement, so changing it from pieces into CBM in this case, is there any ports globally that we can look at consolidation opportunities? That's something that many retailers will be interested to look into. So in this case, while the data is changing to CBM, we can have a look at port level, specific port level, and try to understand whether there is any specific opportunities, for example, within the Shanghai area, Shanghai Ningbo area, where cargo can potentially be consolidated, or in the subcontinent market as well, where we need to try to understand whether we can have any opportunities to consolidate CFS-CY, CFS-CFS, or CY-CY cargo. So in this case, apologies, it's taking a bit too long to load because it's covering a few areas. But so if we narrow down, just quickly, conscious of time, I'll be finishing soon. We can see all of the origin ports from China and India. And again, going back to prioritizing time and prioritizing impact areas, we can see the heat map, where is the biggest origin coming from, and we can try to understand, okay, so let's look at India, for example, in the subcontinent, where we have potentially some consolidation ports like Nhava Sheva, which is Mumbai, Delhi, or Mundra, and we can try to understand, okay, so is there any opportunities for consolidation within this port? So we can see at the top here, so Nhava Sheva, we got a lot of CFS LCL cargo moving alongside CFS-CY. We got Delhi and New Delhi, which obviously from a seafreight perspective sometimes comes from these ports, also using a large number of CFS-CY and CFS-CFS. So this gives us the visibility to put it at a regional level, look at different ports, understand, okay, so there's potentially a consolidation opportunity here that will save us money as retailers. So just very quickly, this is just the last example. If I switch back into my PowerPoint, 1 second, I will be wrapping up. Okay. So you may ask, okay, so where does all this data come from? Different retailers will have different systems, but in this case, from a EV tech point of view, we have underlying modules across multiple clients globally, where they will be tracking this level of milestones within the systems, and all of this data will flow into analytics to provide some of the views that I've shown you over the last 20 minutes or so. So this is an overview of some of the modules that we have. We have to go through that in detail at the moment, and this is the some of the level of milestones visibility that, again, you will expect to see through the life of a PO, which we track in our case through a system that we call Lima from EV Cargo Technology. And in this case, this will allow the tracking of all these milestones will allow modules such as analytics to provide some of those insights and visibility that retailers need for their supply chain. And the last slide, so takeaways. So three takeaways. So first one is there's valuable data already available. So we don't have to wait until a few like a decade or 5 years until we are in a more advanced stage of data within supply chain. It may not be organized and structured and come into different ways, but there's a very large amounts of data already available within the supply chain world that we should be able to use. Analytics can help. So in our case, combining software and industry expertise of being able to understand what the retailers need to see, what's important for them, what's not important. So being able to create those powerful insights and focus that attention is on what matters the most to retailers. That's where the key role and the key advantage of analytics is. And the last point is that the journey has just begun really in the way of technology for analytics. So obviously, predictive analytics and AI are going to play a really big role. Those words are already around in many different solutions, but the true power of AI analytics and trying to use all data, current data, to make instant decision making based on historic information and based on different levels of risks and operational factors, and apply that into real life operational benefits. That's what's going to come. That's going to be one of the main benefits over the next 5 years when it comes to the power of AI and predictive analytics. So that is all from my side. Thank you for your time. We have some time for questions now, 5 minutes. But if we run out of time, that's my email address, the bottom right, and also you can reach me through LinkedIn. So I hope you had a great, hope you enjoyed the webinar. So have we got any questions, Heidi?
Yeah, Aitor, we have 2 questions. They are both from VJ. So the first one, VJ asked while you were doing the demo. So the first question is is the delay supplier based on standard lead time, or is it taking into account delivery dates from PO and the actual delivery date?
So good question. So in this case, in our solution, we are looking at expected PO ship date at origin, and if we look back to one of my last slides of the different PO milestones, there are a number of iterations that a supplier will need to achieve throughout the movement of the order upstream. So there's a number of milestones that the supplier will have to be meeting against KPI, such as PO being raised, supplier booking with freight forwarder, supplier handing over the cargo, supplier providing the documents. So in our solution that I've shown, the level of KPI and SLA, that's based on a combination of the data that the retailers will have provided with us against what their expected PO ship date and expected ship date will be throughout those different milestones, and also against the different supplier milestones targets that the supplier themselves will have set within the system. So, but that's only just for these specific views. But in essence, we can set that up against whichever KPI and whichever supplier SLA we have to in the future. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Aitor. Vijay, you can let us know if you have any follow-up question to your first question. So the second question also from Vijay is, how is the integration of the software happens with the service provider?
Yeah, so good question. So so as per the last slide, so I can actually go back here. So these are the modules that within our solution feed into analytics. So the three modules in here, the blue ones, so that's what we would call Lima, so order management, shipment management, and delivery management. Normally a retailer will have either all three of them or a combination of them and some other upstream modules, but it will be these modules that are integrated with the carriers, with the freight forwarders, with the third party providers. So there is integration, different ASN levels of integration from origin to end with all third-party providers and all suppliers throughout these modules, and then that information within Lima, in this case, or all the different modules will feed into analytics. So at the moment, we don't have a integration going directly with third-party providers into analytics. It goes through different modules, and then those modules will feed in that data into our analytics module as well. So that's how we connect with third-party providers, and we do that across all of our clients. Have different levels of integration with different shipping lines, different carriers, and different freight forwarders, and that data will be available within Lima. And if we look back into some of the previous views that I've shown within analytics, you can also look at the performance of the different freight forwarders, right? So if a retailer is looking at the different performance and holding data across different freight forwarders, that can be compared and analyzed through our analytics solution as well. But yeah, integration is done through the modules and feeding into analytics. And yeah, I hope that answered your question as well.
Thank you. And then we have the third question, and I think that will be our last question given our limited time. So the last question, that's from David. Can you recommend a way or certified courses for supply chain professionals to gain knowledge on data analytics that they can apply in practice? Okay, I don't have any courses on mind. I mean, we have a pool of talented people within tech that obviously have worked on analytics and know all about it. So potentially as a follow-up question, if I can check internally, and then I can maybe if you drop me a note, an email, or a message on LinkedIn, I'll be happy to provide you with some resources on what the team recommend. I could guess some on the top of my mind, but I would rather check with the technical team within tech, because I think they will have the best knowledge. So yeah, I'm happy to follow that up for you internally and give you some insights. Okay, so I think that's all for today. 1 minute left. So yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed the webinar. I found it useful. If you have any questions, please do reach out to me on my email or LinkedIn. I'll be happy to cover them, or any conversations. If you are down in Sydney, we can meet up for coffee if you like. But otherwise, yeah, happy to have any conversations or discussions that you want around analytics or any other area related to supply chain technology. So thank you all for your day. Hope you have a great rest of the day. And yeah, thank you. Bye.